When I was in graduate school, I picked up a hot best-selling book. I was studying economics. In the book, hundreds of pages were filled with explaining how looters who run their countries, dictators, lords, feudal lords in the past, slavers in the past, dictators today, and uh, or bureaucrats even, lead their countries to misery and poverty. And other pages were filled with championing secure private property rights and freedom to innovate and produce wealth as leading countries to prosperity and success. It was most of the things that a freedom and prosperity minded student like me, and like maybe many of you, wants to hear. Finally, I thought somebody is asking big questions in economics and providing what sounds as decent answers. Fast forward to 2024, and authors of the book, Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, with their collaborator Simon Johnson, receive a Nobel Prize in Economics, the most prestigious awards that gives you a pretty loud voice, both in the culture and in the field and in the universities. Not that they didn't have that voice already, just one of their books appears in almost 1,700 syllabi across United States universities, and of course, after they receive the Nobel Prize, media hails them as new authorities on why some nations are poor, others are rich, and what to do about it. Now, their ideas, as they were for me, can be seductive and sound really good. But ultimately, AGR, and that's how I'm going to refer to them from now on, because for simplicity's sake, if we take them seriously, they actually turn against the values that they and those who read them allege to defend, the values of liberty and prosperity. I will show you why, and we will start with the seductive part. So let me speak in their own words first. First, they champion secure private property. Quote, secure private property rights are central, since only those with such rights will be willing to invest and increase productivity. A businessman who expects his output to be stolen, expropriated, or entirely taxed away will have little incentive to work, let alone any incentive to undertake investments and innovations. Sounds pretty good. With secure private property rights, innovators, creators, builders can trust what they keep, what they earn, what they produce. Freedom to think and keep the fruits of the labor of that thinking protected by private property rights is necessary for wealth. This is what they say, quote, though you can move someone to a factory, you cannot force people to think and have good ideas by threatening to shoot them. You can't. That's true. Thinking is an act of a free mind, and who is secure in the fruits of its effort. In the regime of secure private property rights, when thinkers and creators are free to innovate and build, growth, innovation, prosperity follows. Quote, economic growth and technological change are accompanied by what great economist Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction. They replace the old with the new. New sectors attract resources away from old ones. New firms take business away from established ones. New technologies make existing skills and machines obsolete. So now if we put it all together, what's seductive about what they say? Individuals who are free to pursue their great ideas, create, innovate, build, and secure in their property to keep the results of their efforts, produce wealth. In contrast to those who have to ask permissions from guilds, dictators, churches, or bureaucracies, or those who think that whatever they produce will get extracted away. But that's how I would put it. That's not how they would put it. As they summarize, the wealth follows from a situation when, quote, whoever has a good idea for an innovation or valuable investment gets a chance to carry it out. I'm looking for the philosophical detection antennas, because if they're active and attuned, they should be sounding a pretty loud alarm right there. Because you see, they didn't say nobody is forcefully prevented from carrying out their ideas, producing in a voluntary exchange and keeping the rewards that they earn. They said, gets a chance to carry it out. You see, property, markets, liberty, rule of law, and the rewards that come from that are not enough for AGR. Because in a free market, in a free voluntary exchange, some stroke of bad luck, or someone who is much more skilled or highly dominant already in the field where you would like to pursue your good ideas, or some other unforeseen circumstances might mean that you don't get your chance. You don't necessarily get your chance, even if you have something that seems like a good idea. To correct for that, AGR's core theory and the core concept that we provide, and for which we receive the prize as well, is that we have to pursue more than just markets, freedom, and property. We have to pursue institutions that are inclusive. Inclusive institutions. What are those? This is their words again. Quote, "Those that allow and encourage participation by the great mass of people in economic activities that make best of use of their talents and skills, and that enable individuals to make the choices they wish." Enable individuals to make the choices they wish, end quote. So it's a situation when no one gets to decide alone where to take the technological direction, who benefits from production, who succeeds, who doesn't succeed. Everybody gets their chance. Everybody gets a choice to make a choice they wish. Now that's still a little vague, so let me illustrate. I want you to really, really understand what an inclusive institution means, because you'll hear that concept out there. And the prime example, you can ask me in a Q&A that we will have a short while about some other examples, but the prime example of an inclusive institution that illustrates how it works is antitrust. It's antitrust laws. It's existed before, it exists now, and it's something that AGR champion and want to see more of in the future. Think about last 5 years. I don't know if you know about 2 major legal battles. Apple has been fighting a legal battle against Epic Games in antitrust case, and Google has been fighting against the Department of Justice. Apple and Epic. In 2020, Epic Games, who is a producer of the probably biggest video game in history, Fortnite, decided in 2020 that they're not too keen on paying the 30% commission that Apple charges on purchases made within the App Store. They snuggled in a new version of an app that allowed consumers to buy directly from Epic and circumvent Apple's commission. Apple removes them from the App Store. Epic sues. 5 years of trial, appeal, and court opinions later, Apple is now forced to reinstate Fortnite and to allow any developer to connect consumers directly to payments without paying 30% to Apple. The next case, Google. The Department of Justice, accused Google of exclusive agreements that they make with someone like Apple again, and they pay billions of dollars to be a default engine. It means that when you go on your Safari or you search something on internet, you by default using Google search. That, in the court's eyes, in the Department of Justice and antitrust law's eyes, means that whoever would like to introduce their new idea of a search engine, whether it's AI powered today or something else, they basically have no way, because Google has years long-term agreements with their companies that sets them as a default, and who changes their default engine on a device, right? So think about it this way. Now, Apple and Google, nobody, and not even the courts, thinks that Apple and Google didn't deserve what they earned, didn't deserve the wealth and the success that they have earned. Both the courts acknowledge that, the commentators acknowledge that. They have built it, they have innovated, they have earned it. But you see, protecting such ability, neither for the antitrust laws nor for AGR, protecting ability and rewards of that ability is the goal. The goal is someone else getting a chance. Apple got their chance. Epic Games wants their chance now. Google got their chance. There's so many wannabes who would like to be the biggest search engine today. They need their chance. So if AGR were not the cause of these cases like that, and that's just few examples of antitrust cases that you see today, even if they were not the cause, this is an example of how ideas silently from the rooms of MIT right here in Boston or Harvard move into the culture, move into the courts of law, move into the minds probably of someone like CEO of Epic Games, and who now can attack producers like Apple and Google in the name of inclusivity. You see, property, free minds, innovation, concern of wealth, the thing that we started with, the seductive part, at this point, it's all down the drain. The end goal for AGR is not wealth, is not freedom, it's equality. It's egalitarian distribution of chances. And for me, my illusions maybe were justified when I was in grad school, or thousands of students today might be disillusioned too, but they got absolutely dispelled after their later work, and especially the Nobel Prize that they have received. In the interviews after they get the Nobel Prize, Simon Johnson, for example, says, the goal of economics, the goal of economics as a field is, quote, should be to deliver shared prosperity to as many people on the planet as possible. Daron Acemoglu adds that the point of studying economic development, or even of science in general, is to narrow the gap between rich and poor countries. And how do you narrow the gap? Well, when asked about Google, Acemoglu said, I would promote a 50% tax on any ad revenue that they earn over $500 million just to make space for others. That's how you reduce the gap. So how come, where is that defense of, at least alleged defense of property, innovation, free thinking came from? Only to the extent that they support their goal of reducing the gap. Those who make use of property, of their free mind, of their creative ability, like Apple or Google, in this framework are not seen as achievements, as something that we pursued in the first place, for what we created the conditions of that freedom. No, they're the barriers for someone else to get the chance. So I started this presentation with question, do they get why nations fail? And the answer to that precise question is yes. They understand that extractive institutions, what they call extractive institutions, slavery, serfdom, nationalized industry, bureaucracy when you have permission, or controlled by churches or royal authorities, or you name it, never did and never will produce anything else except misery and poverty. But that's it. Where is the alternative? Where is the question of the nature and causes of the wealth of nations? Something Adam Smith asked and titled his book with. And that alternative is not in their minds, doesn't seem like that important. And not because they don't have the intelligence to deal with it. Of course they do. They're incredibly intelligent and smart scholars. It is possible to see how they see industrial revolution in Britain as a result of finally institutions that were preventing people from participating in economic and social development and rising in their status and wealth as not inclusive. And as those institutions were breaking down, people were finally included in a both social mobility and economic development, and they finally got their chance. So you could say it that way, but vague approximations like that are the means for which bad ideas, evil ideas, sneak in as good in your mind, in our minds, and in culture. And I heed Ayn Rand's warning, and I hope all of you will, that, quote, all philosophical con games count on you using words as vague approximations. You must not take a catchphrase or any abstract statement as if it were approximate. Take it literally. Don't translate it. Don't glamorize it. Don't make the mistake of thinking, as many people do, nobody could possibly mean this. And then proceed to endow it with some whitewashed meaning of your own. Take it straight for what it does say and mean. And when AGR say, we want everybody to get their chance, and we want inclusivity, they mean it. If their ideas were actually applied to something like Industrial Revolution, we would have taxed and stolen to death every spinning jenny producer and owner in the name of inclusivity to somehow give every weaver a chance. So yesterday, Yaron, if you were at Yaron's lecture, he talked about the defenders of Western civilization and how they failed because they would always circle back on altruism, on Christianity, on collectivism. And that the real defenders of capitalism and freedom have to reject that and propose something new and better. Well, the job is still open. Thank you. We have time for a few questions, about 10 minutes. And if you have a question, the microphone is right there. So if you can proceed to that aisle if you have any.
Hi, great talk.
Hello.
What is your assessment of Adam Smith? Do you think we should go back and read more of him? And because he did have a lot to say.
In what sense are you asking? For today or for...
Oh, would you regard reading Adam Smith again as a part of the cure for dangers like the AGR?
Absolutely. It's not full cure for sure, because Adam Smith hasn't seen enough of what we have needed to see to develop the Industrial Revolution. The role for Ayn Rand, it was the role of a mind. She said like she couldn't produce her theory and defend capitalism without seeing the development of the Industrial Revolution and how much intellectual ability means for production. Adam Smith didn't have that yet. And while he was an ingenious, he laid the grounds for many important concepts in economics, which is why we should still read him. And sometimes much better than some writers today. It would be enough to read Wealth of Nations. It would be better than read some of others. But reading him is not going to be sufficient. I think it's important for our foundation to know where ideas that gave rise to and supported a lot of the development in 19th century came from, but I wouldn't say he is the cure. Thank you.
Great talk, Robertas.
Thank you, Yuri.
Especially the last one of the last sentences when you quoted Ayn Rand about you have to take the words literally, not as a vague approximation. That's it exactly. My question actually was very related to the predecessor on Adam Smith. You sort of answered that already. Where do you see Adam Smith? I see him much more as an apologist of capitalism, not as a defender. Given his theory of moral sentiments, his ethics was completely utilitarian, collectivist, whatever. So I would see him much closer to apology of capitalism, like these these three people, than a defender. So this has not much to do with economics. This has really much to do with philosophy. So I would second your saying or your answering. Reading Adam Smith would not be enough. I think reading Adam Smith is far, far, far away from what we actually need to defend capitalism. Thanks.
Yeah, for those who maybe don't have the context, if you didn't read Adam Smith, he's famous for introducing the idea of an invisible hand. It's that, people, if they're self-interested and they act in the market pursuing their selfish goals, but the market, the force, the invisible hand of the market guides them to benefit everyone and benefit society. So what Yuri referred to here is, yes, Adam Smith, if you take him, again, literally, not like there's a lot of scholarship around Adam Smith who, he maybe didn't mean it that way. But if you actually take what he says, it means that the justification for freedom and capitalism is not because people are free to pursue their goals and their sort of selfish achievements. It's because that benefits some common good. So, yeah.
Hi. You mentioned that AJR, the set of authors, is well regarded because of their Nobel Prizes and given the popularity of their book. I was wondering about your assessment of the wider group of modern economists, and if you think they generally support inclusive institutions, and if there's better thinkers.
Well, there is the whole field in economics that's called institutionalism. And these three are a prime representative of the field. And that field says, look, we can't just think about the market in a vacuum, right? We need to think it about in a political context. Because some economists go that far as like, we don't even think about politics. We just think markets, and if it's controlled markets, we still think we can apply the same analysis to those. And these guys come in and say that's bogus. You have to place economics in the context of the political system defines economic relationships in a sense. And I think that's fundamentally, maybe not a little bit about it, it's true and important. But the field of institutionalists are sort of, in my eyes, in my reading, are sort of gravitating towards this theory of inclusive institutions and what do they mean and how do they advance. But it's not yet, while they're super popular, you can call them mainstream economics, right? There's a distinction. These people are super popular, MIT, Harvard, mainstream universities. There's a whole other strand of free market economics who would clearly, or not clearly, but at least allegedly reject this theory, but they're not as influential and far from being as popular and important as these people are. Students don't read those. Students actually read AGR.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Very good talk and timely as it happens because my husband has read this book recently and he was trying to explain to me the basic concepts and he mentioned inclusive and he also mentioned the foil for that, which was extractive. And based on his description, I said, well, my spidey senses went up and I said, I don't think I'm going to read this book.
Okay.
But I don't think you in your talk talked about what they meant by extractive. So inclusive seems to whitewash the redistribution. I'm wondering if extractive actually smears some of what we would consider good or free.
Do you have something in particular in mind?
No, I'm just wondering generally what your sense of how they used extractive. Your talk was focusing on how they used exclusive. So
So extractive is a much simpler concept in their minds, and it's much clearer what they mean. By extractive, they can give you examples. So think slavery, right? It's like literal extraction of work from some to others, or serfdom, or feudal system where someone is completely prohibited from owning property on land. It has to rely on a lord, right? So dictatorship, when the system is sort of developed that there is no way you can go about doing your economic activity or producing something without paying your dues, if you will, to the protectors. So extractive, in a sense, if you want to give them a definition, is going to be something like when economic and political institutions are disallowing a great sort of broader section of society of participating in economic activities or in political decision making. So their conception of that is it's those institutions that take from some and give to a small controlling elite, they would say. So there is some of that. I think the extractive, if not the definition and not the actual conception, if they read their work, there is great research how they read. That's why I said they're not stupid. They're super intelligent. If you read the last few hundred years or even few thousand years, they do research all over the civilization and what kind of political arrangements, institutions were more on the extractive side versus others. So I think generally to conceptualize it by extractive, they mean, it's looters. That's it.
Okay, so just one minute. So in terms of their research and their covering the history of these types of societies, there's probably some value to be gained from that as long as you have your spidey senses up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's a part of how I read them. And they have, for more about their influence, Darren Acemoglu is the most cited scholars in economics in the last 20 years. So he's the guy right there. And he publishes and writes. So to read them, they do a lot of interesting work from the perspective of statistics, modeling, history, but the conceptions, the morality that they bring, the philosophy that they use to integrate the things that they are observing and researching, that you have to be very, very careful and attuned to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I also read the book. I think it's very interesting, the examples they give and so on. And I wanted to hear your stance regarding the role that culture plays in this sense. Like, I get the fact of the institutions. I think they're also very important, but what do you think about it? Like the relationship between both? And do you think do countries fail more because of a weak culture or because of only weak institutions? What comes first? And what's the tension between them?
You're asking my stance on or how they describe it?
Maybe both, if you could give them.
Okay. So for them, and I don't agree with that thinking, that for them something like culture is very similar to institutions, because if you define an institution as a established law, practice, or custom, That's how they would define an institution. So in a sense, for them, that's part of a problem, is like a law that prohibits you from doing something or directs your activity in a specific way is no different from a custom when people, like a cultural environment around you, pushes you in some direction or shuns away from you when they disagree. So like the Christian culture, for example, right, it was not only the laws that prohibited usury and charging interest on money, people would actually break ties with you if you did charge interest on money. So culture is important in that sense. It's like the idea, the dominant ideas, if you think of culture as the dominant ideas that of the culture, they do influence political institutions primarily. There is that. And we also influence the relationship between people. So there is some research done, like in Britain, the culture of gentlemen was important for some of the market developments that they have. I don't really have a good stance on that. So if in their mind, culture and institutions is sort of very similar in operation. I don't think that way. I think when you think of culture, you think of like, and Rand thought of culture as dominant ideas that are spread and are implicit, basically, are in actions and organizations that people pursue. And those are crucial. Those are absolutely important, because no political institution, in my mind, will survive without the supporting ideas that people need to have to advocate, champion, and protect that institution.
Okay, thank you.
Probably last question.
Sure. Hi, I was curious on your thoughts about Robert Solow. First of all, if you think there's any sense in which like he was a breath of fresh air following Keynes, or if like he was still a destructive force as a intellectual, since he doesn't go into the underlying ethics necessary for property rights, and again how you think he relates to the modern day, like Darren Acemoglu and those guys.
Yeah, how do I do this briefly? Solow was another Nobel Prize winner in economics, probably in his 60s, if I remember correctly. And he's famous for a model of growth, which says, look, you can sort of track the development of countries by very few variables. And it's amount of labor, and then total factor productivity, a residue, statistical things. So put that aside. And there is a sort of graph you can track of growth, and if you increase capital, growth increases. If you increase labor, growth increases. But then there is something in his theory he was mostly concerned about. Look, if we only increase capital and labor, then we have linear growth. But what we're trying to explain is the exponential growth of the last few hundred years. Like the hockey stick, this incredible amount of wealth that we developed since the Enlightenment. And for that, he needed to introduce something what shifts the graph so much up. And like that was ideas, right? And for him, it was technological ideas, scientific ideas. So that was an improvement on what came before. But the theory, in terms of it's very, very rudimentary in a sense. So I don't have the time to go into more detail. But yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.